The fishermen's market smelled of brine and kelp and wood tar, and for as long as Mira could remember, the traders of Harrow Cove had seasoned every tale with salt of the sea. They spoke of living tides that rose and fell, not by the tug of the moon, but by whims of old spirits, of fish that sang beneath foam-topped swells, of bells heard miles offshore when no ship sailed there. But the story that clung most stubbornly to the rafters of the dockside tavern, weaving itself through nets and rope alike, was the myth of the pearl spiral staircase. It was said to sleep in the lightless chasms miles beneath the breakers, a coil of shimmering nacre taller than mountains. Only once every 100 years did it breach the surface, glistening like the inside of an oyster, its steps winding into a vault of night where the stars quiver like cold lanterns. Then, according to the elders, the staircase stood solid for a single turn of the earth, admitting just one climber from the realm of water and air. That solitary soul could ascend beyond the clouds to find a destiny written among constellations, yet folk could never agree on what waited above. Some insisted the climber vanished into godhood, others that the ascent granted a single wish. A few muttered that the staircase was a test, and the stars a forge that melted away a mortal's fears or flesh, depending on their worthiness. Mira had grown on those tales, nursing them the way poorer children nursed thin soup, turning them about in her mind to make the little she possessed feel larger. Her father was lost to a storm before she learned to swim, and her mother's back bent under the weight of oyster baskets, hauled each dawn from tidal flats. By 15, Mira sailed her own skiff. By 20, she could read a sky's subtle warnings in the tilt of distant gulls. Harrow Cove was no place for grand dreams, she told herself, and yet nights came when she would lie on the narrow rooftop of their shack, spyglass pressed to her brow, and trace the arch of the Milky Way until it seemed less like scattered light than a road paved for wandering feet. On such evenings the myth felt near enough to touch, as if the sea itself breathed stories directly into her ear. Still, myths were comforts, nothing more. So she worked. She laughed when laughter could be afforded, and each new day closed politely behind its predecessor. Then, late in Mira's 29th year, the scholars arrived. Their ship, the Horizon Dancer, carried sextants, scrolls etched with star charts, and an unsettling air of certainty. At their head stood Yeston Callis, a thin astronomer whose beard curled like question marks against his collar. He claimed the orbital procession of moons, the ebb cycle of deep ocean currents, and the whispering of something he called stellar harmonics pointed unambiguously to the staircases resurfacing on the next equinox. He spoke without the trembling awe that locals used, as if he surveyed mere weather. Where the villagers clung to the romantic fog of legend, Yeston wielded calculations. Most scoffed at him, but not Mira. She had watched tides long enough to know when nature arranged its furniture for an event. The winds felt restless, and the longshore drift ferried shells ashore that no one had names for. Spirals glazed peak, spirals blazed nightback, spirals pregnant with uncanny music when pressed to the ear. Unlike outsiders who mocked coastal superstitions, Yestin sought partnership. He asked fisher folk to chart unusual currents, requested permission to mount brass instruments atop the old beacon tower, hired children to track odd patterns of bioluminescence after sundown. For all his data, he seemed to lack a single friend. It took only 2 chance conversations, one over storm-drenched crates, another while splicing line at dusk, for Mira to discern the loneliness stitched behind his number. She offered him a place by the hearth to dry vellum maps, and he offered her the language of the sky, names for nebulae, stories folded in Orion's belt, the way comets carved temporary scars across darkness. Through these exchanges, Mira realized the myth had never truly been asleep inside her. It had only waited for a tongue to wake it. The equinox loomed like a blade. Harrow Cove prepared festivals of gratitude, both to celebrate the harvest of late summer and to beg the staircase, if it came, to leave them unscathed. Lanterns were strung along piers, while priests of the tidal shrine draped barnacle-encrusted relics in fresh kelp. Yestin's devices sprouted across rooftops. Polished mirrors, gust rattles made from hollowed reeds, clockwork birds intended to record sudden shifts in air pressure. The townsfolk tolerated his contraptions, albeit with sideways glances. After all, if the myth proved false, they could attribute any misfortune to meddling outsiders. On the eve itself, a hush rolled in, with the fog so thick that each lamp on the pier shone as an island of its own. Dogs whimpered without reason. Somewhere beyond sight, whales sang low notes that made tankards rattle on tavern shelves. Mira stood barefoot on the cold planks, pulse drumming so loud she felt certain the sea could hear it. Yestin hovered a few paces off, scrawling figures by lantern light, though his hands shook to match hers. Midnight neared. The waves, which moments earlier had slapped rhythmically against pilings, flattened into a glassy silence. A sound like distant piano strings being tuned rose from nowhere and everywhere. The water bulged. Not a swell or crest, but an extrusion, as though the ocean floor itself were rising. Luminescence shimmered inside the column, tinting the fog pearl pink. Then the staircase breached. Step upon step coiled upward, each tread wide enough for 2 feet, yet delicate as lace. Nacreous plates overlapped like dragon scales, scattering moonlight into prisms. The spiral did not end anywhere visible. It corkscrewed beyond clouds that parted obediently, revealing a shaft of stars glittering with improbable brightness. Gasps escaped those gathered. Some dropped to knees, a few crossed themselves. Yestin only whispered. The calculations were inadequate, and Mira felt an answering burn in her chest. The language for wonder had never lived in numbers. Legend said the staircase allowed 1 climber, but the myth did not describe how that climber was chosen, or whether choice lay in mortal hands at all. As the structure steadied, fog drew back like drapes, and villagers edged forward. Sailors missing limbs, yet yearning for redemption. Widows whose grief sought elevation. Thrill-seeking smugglers. Even a prince's nephew travelling incognito. For an eye blink, everyone believed themselves destined. Then the first candidate, a broad-shouldered pearl diver named Garin, placed a boot on the lowest stair. At once, the naked dulled beneath him, grey veins spreading like frost. He yelped, withdrawing. Colour returned. A collective murmur sluiced across the pier. A priestess attempted next. The step remained bright, so she took another. On the third, her sandals slipped off as though repelled. She retreated, shaking, tears streaking her cheek. One by one they tried, scholars reciting hymns, children pushed forward by ambitious parents, the prince's nephew brandishing ancestral signet. Each was rebuffed before the 6th stair, the spiral's sheen dimming to dead shell until they relinquished. Mira stood apart, heartbeat thumping so forcefully she tasted iron. She had not planned to climb, had rationalized 100 reasons to stay, yet her feet moved. She approached not as a supplicant, nor as one who expected reward, but as a daughter of tides greeting something older than speech. The crowd quieted. Yestin called her name, perhaps in warning, perhaps in prayer. Either way, the wind drowned it. Mira set her soul on the first stair. A ripple of luminous blue coursed outward, brighter than any earlier attempt. She inhaled seawater tang, felt a low hum ascend her spine. The staircase accepted her. She took step 2, then 3, each tread singing faintly beneath her weight. No force pushed back, instead a warmth guided her upward, as though hands steadied her calves. Behind, shouts erupted, some celebratory, some jealous. The myths had never warned how cruel it felt to be chosen while others were denied. By the 10th spiral loop, the cove below looked like a candle-lit basin. Wind ceased. Gulls drifted on stationary wings. Yet Mira did not ascend alone. A faint clacking arose behind. Yestin had stepped onto the staircase. She twisted to protest, fearful legend would punish both for his intrusion. But the nacre still glowed beneath his boots. Something inside it had evidently widened definition of one. Or perhaps myth-tellers, like all storytellers, overlooked vital exceptions. Side by side they continued, spiraling through mists that smelled of lilac and ozone. Stars grew fat, pulsing with colour. Constellations, once flat in night's tapestry, showed yawning depths between their fires. When they passed above cloud level, the air turned thin, yet neither shivered nor gasped. Mira suspected the staircase exhaled an invisible envelope around them, a moving pocket of home. After a time measured only by heartbeats, the spiral ended. Not at a single platform, but at a scatter of pearl discs adrift in a void of violet twilight. They bobbed like lily pads on a pond, though no water lay beneath. Only distance. At the centre floated a larger disc, its surface set with 12 recesses resembling empty oyster shells. As Mira stepped onto it, the shells filled with swirling images. In one she glimpsed her mother decades forward, face peaceful, telling grandchildren the story of a brave ancestor, lost to the stars yet forever present in the tides. Another shell showed the cove thriving, its harbours expanded, lanterns turned electric, but fisherfolk pausing each equinox to cast flowers into surf. A third displayed a city entirely unfamiliar, crystal towers beneath 2 moons, where youths studied ocean currents as equations named after Mira. The visions shimmered, waiting. Yeston watched, eyes wide. When he stepped near, 6 of the shells flared anew. Treatises he would write, starships forged from insights gleaned tonight. A future where humanity navigated nebula currents with sails of woven light. But there were darker shells too. Glimpses of war waged with such ships, of worlds cracked by greed's gravity wells, of silence where songs of whales had guided Homo sapiens' first voyages. The pearls did not moralize, they presented possibilities. Choice belonged to the climbers. A voice manifested without sound, a meaning that poured directly into thought. One step earned ascent, one heartbeat decides what shall ascend after you. Something like an hourglass appeared overhead, grains of starlight slipping. Mira understood. They could select a single thread, shaping the century to come, before staircase sank once more in the weight eclipsed breath. She met Yestine's gaze, saw identical terror and exhilaration. 2 hearts felt utterly insufficient for such stewardship of humanity's branch point. Mira reached toward the shell, picturing her mother's serenity. Instinct pulled her there, yet she hesitated. That path sowed a gentle life, but confined change to Harrow Cove. Yestine's infinities, starships, knowledge might benefit countless lives, though risk rode shotgun. Their debate flowed in gestures, half-spoken sentences and silences thicker than clouds they'd left. Ultimately, Mira recognized fear seeded much of her preference. Yeston recognized ambition colored his. Together they sought a fusion, they tilted shells, merged visions until a 13th image coalesced in blank space. Vessels voyaging outward, but charting cosmos through songs and currents rather than conquest. Communities forged upon principles mirrored from ocean ecosystems. Balance, interdependence, the humility of tides. The hourglass drained, the merged shell solidified into pearl, sank into the disk, and the floating platform trembled with satisfaction like a satisfied cat. Light roared around them. The myth, having extracted its tax of choice, released its guests. Spiral steps unraveled downward so fast their coils became ribbons. Mira felt neither fear nor vertigo. The staircase carried them, easing through atmosphere, slipping between molecules of cloud. When their bare feet kissed the final stair, dawn bled vermilion along the eastern horizon. Harrow Cove lay hushed, occupants still gathered, eyes uplifted. A collective intake of breath greeted the returning pair, but no one spoke, as though their language lacked a word for them now. The spiral sighed and sank, dissolving into ripples. As nacre melted into glassy waves, Mira knelt, cupping sea water that glittered with motes of pearl. She let it drizzle through fingers back into its parent body, whispering gratitude without articulating to whom. Yeston collapsed onto pier planks, laughing softly. An overflow valve opened after too much stillness. Only then did Mira realize a faint pattern marked his palms, swirling grooves resembling vortex star maps. She checked her own. There lay contours mimicking tidal topography, the unending motion of fluid drawn by moons. They would spend weeks recounting what they could, though dreams often crumbled by breakfast. Yet some memories crystallized. Yestin returned to the horizon dancer, scribbled feverishly, invented new fields, astro-oceanography, spiral mechanic. Mira resumed fishing at dawn, though sometimes she anchored offshore, listening beneath hull boards for songs pointing not to shoals but to far galaxies waiting to be sounded. Fame came reluctantly. Scholars travelled to interview them. Pilgrims wandered to the cove, seeking even flecks of staircase shell rumoured to linger in sand. But the true legacy matured quietly. A decade on, a coastal academy launched research sails shaped to mimic manta rays. Their hulls harvested solar and wave energy, crossing oceans with negligible wake, mapping current symphonies. 20 years later, orbital platforms deployed silvery kites that surfed solar winds, each christened after sea-dwelling mammals. When governments proposed arming these kites, global protest erupted like a whale's breach, and policies shifted towards stewardship. People credited treaties, charismatic leaders, luck. Few traced the thread to a choice made on a floating disk of pearl. Mira aged gently. She married a lighthouse keeper who loved silence, as she did. Together they adopted stray children orphaned by storms, teaching them to read tide lines and star charts. Some nights, when wind lay asleep and her joints throbbed from years of hauling nets, she would feel that old hum-skimming bone marrow, the staircase pulse, echoing across decades. On the eve of her 89th birthday, she walked alone to the shore. Yeston had passed 5 summers before, though not before seeing his theories bloom into spacecraft shaped like clamshells. Mira leaned on a driftwood cane and waited through moonset. No centennial approached, but she felt something stirring. The sea parted without grandeur this time. A single step, a sliver of nacre, no bigger than a platter, rose upon a finger of foam. It gleamed invitation. Mira understood. Likewise, invitation was not for climbing now, but for returning. She looked back at houses sleeping, at gull tracks braided across sand, then forward to horizon, where sky blended with water and memory. She stepped. The sliver dissolved under weightless feet, and she walked outward, each footfall finding invisible support. Dawn's first light painted her silhouette until that too folded into brightness. Those who later combed shore found only a cane and a knotted rope bracelet that smelled faintly of lilac and ozone. Generations afterward, children of Harrow Cove learned the local calendar by 2 festivals, one thanking the tide, and one honouring the woman who climbed the stars and came back bearing nothing but a better future. They retold the myth of the pearl spiral staircase, embellishing where memory blurred. Some said there were 2 climbers, the fisher and the scholar. Others insisted such grandeur could never belong to regular folk. Yet, along seawalls they carved a recurrent motif, a spiral merging with a wave, twined, so neither could be certain where ascent ended and ocean began. And on clear nights, when ships of woven light arced overhead, adults and children alike lifted faces salted by spray, hoping to glimpse within those hulls a faint nacre shine, a reminder that myth, when answered with courage and balance, can spin a single stair into a bridge between worlds.